The first-class cabin went dead silent the moment the champagne hit him. Vanessa Sinclair, businesswoman, social media fixture, someone who had never once waited in a line she didn't choose to stand in, had just emptied her glass directly onto the man sitting beside her. The pale gold liquid soaked through his plain Oxford shirt, while a dozen passengers stared and said nothing. For the next several hours, she mocked him, dismissed him, and made it loudly clear that he did not belong in her cabin. He never raised his voice. He only smiled. That smile was the last thing Vanessa Sinclair would ever underestimate. The gate at O'Hare was loud, the way airports always are. A low roar of rolling luggage gate announcements and people talking too fast into their phones. Logan Carter stood near the back of the boarding line in a plain gray Oxford shirt and dark slacks, a weathered leather carry-on hanging from one shoulder and a laptop bag from the other. He looked like a man who traveled often and had long stopped caring about looking like he did. No watch that announced itself, no jacket that needed to be noticed, just a quiet stillness that was easy to overlook in a crowd which was more or less exactly the point. He had done this dozens of times over the years. Board a flight. Take whatever seat the system assigned him. Watch. Not in the way a mystery shopper watches, clipboard in hand and a checklist in his coat pocket. Logan watched the way a person watches when they already know the answer and are only waiting to see if the room figures it out on its own. Horizon Air was his. Every seat, every overhead bin, every meal cart and safety card and pre-recorded announcement, all of it traced back to decisions he had made, standards he had set, and a culture he had spent nearly 2 decades trying to build and protect. The only way to know whether any of that was real, he had decided early on, was to experience it the way his passengers did. Anonymously, without the deference that came with being recognized. The gate agent, a young man named Tyler, with a practiced smile, ran Logan's ticket and glanced at the screen. Something shifted in his expression, the small, involuntary look of someone recalculating. He cleared his throat lightly and said that the coach cabin had reached capacity and that Logan had been automatically upgraded to first class at no charge. He handed the boarding pass back with both hands, the same way you might hand something back to someone whose name you didn't quite catch, but felt you should have. Logan thanked him without fanfare, tucked the pass into his jacket pocket, and walked down the jetway like a man who had nowhere particular to be. Seat 3A. Window seat, left side of the cabin, second row from the bulkhead. Logan stowed his carry-on, settled into the leather seat, and opened his laptop before the cabin had finished boarding. The files on his screen were not personal. They were operational. Route performance summaries, staff retention data from the past 2 quarters, a string of emails flagged for his attention from his head of customer experience, a woman named Patricia, who had a gift for identifying problems before they surfaced and a habit of writing emails at 2 in the morning. Logan read through them steadily, occasionally making a note in the margin of a printed page he had tucked into the front pocket of his bag. From a distance, he looked like any mid-level executive grinding through a workday 35,000 feet off the ground. He was not paying attention to the woman who took the seat beside him until she made it impossible not to. She arrived the way certain people always arrive, slightly, after everyone else, deliberately unhurried, with a rolling carry-on in matte black, and a tone that implied the aisle had been cleared specifically for her convenience. Vanessa Sinclair was in her mid-40s, dressed in a cream blazer and tailored trousers. Her dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and wasn't. She had the kind of face that photographed well, which she knew because her face photographed well approximately 5 to 6 times a week across 4 different platforms. She was a brand. She had said so herself in at least a dozen interviews. The brand, by most visible measures, was doing extraordinarily well. She took the aisle seat beside Logan, seat 3B, set her bag down with authority, and reached for the cabin attendant call button before she had fully sat down. A flight attendant appeared almost immediately. Her name tag read Rachel, and she moved with the kind of efficiency that comes not from being new to something, but from having done it long enough that the motion had become instinct. She had been with Horizon Air for 6 years, had worked international routes before transferring to domestic first class, and carried herself with a composure that was immediately visible to anyone paying attention. Logan noticed it within the first 30 seconds. Vanessa did not appear to notice it at all. Vanessa ordered still water and a specific brand of sparkling water, confirmed that the champagne was the correct vintage, and asked whether the meal had been catered by the correct vendor, all in the same smooth, unhurried cadence. Rachel answered each question with careful professionalism and disappeared toward the galley. Vanessa settled back, crossed one leg over the other, and turned her gaze to the window, and that was when she noticed Logan. She didn't say anything at first. She only looked. Her eyes moved from his plain Oxford shirt to the worn corner of his laptop bag, to the printed documents on his tray table. It was the kind of look that catalogs rather than observes, that organizes what it sees into a hierarchy and assigns a number. Logan, if he noticed, gave no indication. He kept his eyes on his screen and continued typing with the focused, unhurried efficiency of someone who had long since made peace with being underestimated. But Vanessa Sinclair was not the type to sit quietly with an opinion. When Rachel returned with the sparkling water and a flute of champagne, Vanessa took the glass and gestured almost imperceptibly toward Logan, a small sideways movement of her chin, the kind of gesture made between people who expect to be understood without having to explain themselves. She said in a tone calibrated to reach Rachel, but not carry past the next row, that she wanted to confirm something. She wanted to confirm that the seat beside her had been properly assigned and not given to a passenger who had been bumped up from coach. She said the word coach the way someone might say the word inconvenience, precisely deliberately without apology. Rachel's expression did not flicker, which was a credit to her training and to the 6 years behind it. She confirmed that seat 3B had been automatically reassigned due to a cabin capacity adjustment and that the passenger was fully entitled to first-class service. Vanessa made a small sound in the back of her throat that said she had received the information and was not particularly satisfied with it. She took a long sip of champagne and looked back toward the window. Logan turned a page. The plane pushed back from the gate at 11:47 in the morning Central Time. By the time the seatbelt sign clicked off and the cabin settled into cruising altitude, Vanessa had found 3 additional things to say to Rachel about the temperature, about the angle of the overhead vent, and about the fact that a passenger 2 rows back was laughing too loudly. Each complaint was delivered with the confident air of someone who had never once been told that their complaints were unreasonable, and who had therefore never developed a reason to question them. Rachel addressed each one without visible frustration, adjusted what could be adjusted, and explained calmly what could not. She did not apologize more than once for any single thing, which Logan noted as well. Logan said nothing through all of this. He ordered coffee when Rachel offered it, thanked her by name when she brought it, and went back to his documents. He had seen this before. Not often Horizon Air ran a strong cabin product, and its first-class load tended toward the business-frequent traveler who had calibrated their expectations to reality. But he had seen it, the particular kind of entitlement that doesn't read itself as entitlement because it has never been asked to, the kind of confidence that mistakes its own comfort for a standard the world has agreed to uphold. What interested him was not Vanessa. What interested him was Rachel. Rachel moved through the cabin with the calm efficiency of someone who had been well-trained and was now being quietly tested. Every time Vanessa redirected her, made a comment just pointed enough to sting, but vague enough to deflect, or let her gaze linger on Logan with that cataloging look, Rachel absorbed it and continued. She did not over-apologize. She did not make eye contact with Logan in a way that invited him into a shared complaint. She did not let her expression shift in the direction of the 2 passengers in the row behind, who were clearly tracking everything that was happening. She simply handled what was in front of her, one thing at a time, with a composure that Logan recognized as the real thing and not a performance of it. He made a mental note, the kind he didn't write down. The flight was scheduled to land at Los Angeles International at 1:53 in the afternoon Pacific time. It was a 4-hour crossing, and for the first 2 of those hours, the cabin maintained the kind of tense, well-mannered peace that holds when everyone on both sides of a conflict has decided for the moment to keep the volume down. Vanessa made her dissatisfaction known in the incremental, deniable way that experienced complainers often do a look here, a quietly pointed question there, a remark addressed to no one in particular that everyone in the vicinity was clearly meant to hear. Logan occupied himself with his work and did not perform indifference. He was simply indifferent in the way a person is indifferent when they are watching something that has not yet reached the part that requires their attention. That moment came somewhere over the Nevada desert at an altitude of 35,000 feet on a Tuesday afternoon when Vanessa Sinclair looked at the documents spread across Logan's tray table, then looked at his face and arrived at a conclusion that made her feel both confirmed and irritated. She had been deciding something for the last 2 hours. She had decided it now. She flagged Rachel down and said, in a voice that no longer bothered to stay below the conversational radius of their row, that she found it uncomfortable to be seated beside someone who had been placed in first class without earning it. She said she would appreciate it if the situation could be looked into. She said this in the patient, measured tone of someone who considers themselves to be doing everyone a favor by speaking plainly. Rachel said she understood, and that she would see what could be done. Her voice was even. Her expression gave nothing away. Logan looked up from his screen for the first time in nearly an hour. He looked at Vanessa, the way a person looks at a clock, not to judge it, simply to register what it says. Then he looked back at his documents. He turned a page. He kept reading. Whatever he was thinking, he kept it exactly where it was. The decision he was making was a simple one. The same decision he had made every time he had done this. He could end it. 2 words to Rachel or a single phone call from his seat, and the entire dynamic in the cabin would shift in a way that could not be walked back. He had done it once years ago on a flight out of Dallas, and he had not found the result satisfying. What he had learned from that experience was that the moment you reveal the card, you stop seeing the table. You stop seeing how people behave when they believe the stakes are ordinary. And right now, with Rachel managing a genuinely difficult situation with more grace than most of his senior staff showed in weekly meetings, the stakes being ordinary was exactly the information he needed. So he kept the card where it was. He turned another page. He watched the desert pass 35,000 feet below, pale and flat, and completely indifferent to everything happening above it. He would let it unfold. He would see what everyone decided to do when they believed no one important was watching. That was, after all, the only way to learn anything real. The drink service came around again somewhere past the 2-hour mark, when the Nevada desert had given way to the pale brown expanse of the Mojave, and the cabin had settled into that particular mid-flight quiet, where people either sleep or pretend to. Rachel moved through the aisle with the cart efficient and unhurried refilling glasses without being asked, and checking on passengers with the kind of attention that doesn't announce itself. When she reached row 3, she offered Logan a second coffee, which he accepted, and offered Vanessa a champagne refill, which Vanessa accepted without looking up from her phone. The problem started when Rachel set the fresh flute down on Vanessa's tray table and moved to set Logan's coffee on his. Vanessa looked up then. She looked at Logan's tray, at the open laptop, the printed documents, the pen resting across a margin full of handwritten notes, and something in her expression shifted from mild contempt to active calculation. She had been watching him work for nearly 2 hours. She had watched him read. She had watched him write in the margins of documents that looked from where she sat like internal business reports. And she had arrived as people like Vanessa often do when confronted with a picture they don't want to accept, at the interpretation that required the least amount of revision to her existing worldview. She said loudly enough for the rows immediately around them to hear that it was interesting how some people felt the need to perform being busy. She said it to no one in particular in the conversational tone of someone sharing an observation at a dinner party. She glanced at Logan's documents the way you might glance at a prop in a school play, acknowledging their presence while making clear you are not convinced by them. A woman in the row behind shifted slightly in her seat. The man across the aisle, navy blazer magazine open on his tray, raised his eyes without moving his head. Logan did not look up. He finished the sentence he was writing, clicked his pen once, and set it down across the page. Then he reached for his coffee, took a sip, and returned to his screen. He had the specific stillness of a man who has decided that a situation does not yet require his full attention, and who is comfortable waiting for the moment it does. Vanessa took that stillness as confirmation of something. She leaned slightly toward the aisle and said to Rachel, who was still positioned near the cart, that she would like to know what the policy was regarding noise and workspace etiquette in first class. She said she found it distracting to sit beside someone who was clearly unfamiliar with the environment. She used the word environment the way certain people use it, not to describe a place, but to describe a standard that they personally embody and others visibly fail to meet. Rachel said the policy was that all passengers in first class were entitled to use their tray tables and personal space for work or leisure as they preferred. She said it evenly, without adding anything to it, which was exactly the right move, and which Vanessa did not receive well. Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. She picked up her champagne and looked back at her phone, and for approximately 4 minutes, the row was quiet. Then she reached across the armrest not far, but deliberately, and shifted the position of the shared console between their seats. It was a small gesture, the kind that can be explained away as accidental, and isn't. Logan's water glass, which had been sitting on the console, shifted with it, and came close enough to the edge of his tray table to require him to catch it with one hand before it tipped. He caught it, set it back, and said nothing. The man in the navy blazer across the aisle looked up, registered what he had just seen, and looked back down at his page. He did not say anything. The cabin's collective decision to stay out of it was holding, but it was beginning to cost something the effort of pretending not to see what was directly in front of them. Rachel had seen it from the galley entrance. She came back down the aisle with the composure of someone who is managing something they did not cause and cannot entirely control. She asked both passengers if everything was all right in the neutral, careful way that flight attendants are trained to ask when everything is clearly not all right, and the goal is to de-escalate without assigning blame. Vanessa said she was fine. Logan said he was fine. Rachel nodded and stayed close to the row, straightening things that didn't need. Straightening, making herself a visible presence without inserting herself into something she hadn't been asked to referee. Vanessa watched her do this. Then she looked at Logan again. She looked at the way he sat, steady, unhurried, taking up exactly the amount of space that was his, and not a centimeter more. And something about that specific quality of ease appeared to bother her in a way that the documents and the coffee and the margin notes had not. There was no performance in him, and the absence of it was for someone like Vanessa its own kind of provocation. She said, still in that dinner party tone, that she genuinely could not understand how the airline allowed its upgrade system to work the way it did. She said that handing a first-class seat to someone from coach without any kind of screening process showed a real lack of judgment. She said she had been a premium member for 6 years, and she expected a certain standard of fellow passenger, and that standard was not currently being met. The man in the navy blazer across the aisle turned his page without reading it. Logan set his pen down again. He looked at Vanessa directly for the first time since she had sat down, which was only the second time he had looked at her directly at all. His expression was not angry. It was not offended. It was the expression of a man taking a measurement. He held her gaze for a moment, then looked back at his laptop and said quietly, and without particular emphasis, that she should be careful about the assumptions she made on airplanes. Vanessa laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, not cruel exactly, but dismissive in the way that laughter can be when it is deployed as a response to something the laugher has decided not to take seriously. She said she didn't think she had made any assumptions at all. She said she was simply describing what she saw. She reached for her champagne glass, and in the specific way that some moments arrive not gradually, but all at once. Like a door coming off its hinges, she turned and emptied the glass directly onto Logan's shirt. The pale gold liquid spread across the front of his Oxford shirt and soaked through to the fabric beneath. A few drops caught the edge of his open laptop. The documents on his tray table held barely. The cabin went the way cabins go when something genuinely unexpected happens in a confined space, not loud, but suddenly completely still. Vanessa set the empty flute back on her tray table. She looked at Logan with the flat, unapologetic expression of someone who has just done something they are prepared to defend. Then she said it, clearly, without lowering her voice. By your own economy. What followed was not silence, so much as the absence of all the small sounds a cabin makes when people feel safe. The quiet shift of weight in a seat, the soft rustle of a magazine page, the ambient murmur of a conversation 2 rows back. All of it stopped. The man in the navy blazer was no longer pretending to read. The woman in the seat behind Logan had her hand over her mouth. Rachel stood at the galley entrance with a linen cloth in one hand and the particular expression of someone who has just watched a situation move past the point where training is enough. 3 rows back, no one was speaking. The whole cabin had gone to the same place, at the same time that specific, uncomfortable stillness. Of people who have witnessed something they cannot unsee, and are now deciding what to do with it. Logan looked down at his shirt. Then he looked up at Vanessa. He did not raise his voice. He did not reach for his phone, or stand up, or say anything that the row around him would need to process later. He simply looked at her with the same steady measurement he had used before, and said in a tone that was quiet enough that the rows behind them couldn't quite catch it, but Vanessa heard every word. You're going to wish you hadn't done that. Vanessa held his gaze for 3 full seconds, and then she looked away first. She picked up her phone. She did not look at him again, but the set of her shoulders had changed in a way that was hard to name and impossible to ignore. Rachel was at the row in seconds, offering Logan a fresh linen cloth and speaking to him in a low voice. He thanked her, blotted the front of his shirt, and closed his laptop carefully. He stacked his documents. He put his pen in his jacket pocket. Then he looked at Rachel and asked her very calmly to let the captain know he would like a word. Rachel looked at him the way people look at someone when the information in front of them doesn't match the category they had filed the person under. She said, of course, and walked toward the front of the cabin. Vanessa watched her go. She looked back at Logan. He was sitting with his hands folded on the closed laptop looking straight ahead, and he was no longer watching anything. He had finished the part of the exercise that required observation. He was now simply waiting. The captain's name was Captain Daniel Warren, 18 years with Horizon Air, a service record that Logan could have recited from memory if anyone had asked. Captain Warren did not come out of the cockpit. That was protocol. The flight deck stays sealed during cruise unless the situation demands otherwise, and Logan had not asked him to come out. Instead, Captain Warren sent his first officer back into the cabin with a quiet word for Rachel, and then Rachel came to row 3 with the specific composed expression of someone who has just received information that has rearranged the room she was standing in. She leaned down toward Logan and spoke in a voice low enough that only he could hear it clearly. She confirmed who he was using, his name and his title, and asked if he wanted her to proceed. Logan said yes. He said to do it correctly. Rachel straightened up, smoothed the front of her jacket once, and looked at Vanessa Sinclair with an expression that was still professional and still composed, but was no longer the expression of someone managing a situation from below it. Vanessa looked from Rachel to Logan. She opened her mouth to say something. A question, or a correction, or another version of the confidence she had been spending freely for the past 2 hours. And Rachel spoke first. She said that she needed to inform Ms. Sinclair that the passenger beside her was Logan Carter, the founder and chief executive of Horizon Air, and that this aircraft was operated by his company. She said it without flourish. She said it the way you say something that doesn't need any help landing. The color left Vanessa's face the way color leaves a room when the light goes out. Not slowly, but all at once and completely. Logan looked at her. He did not smile. He did not say anything immediately. He simply let the information do what information does when it arrives too late to be useful. Then he said, still quietly, still without raising his voice, that he was going to need Rachel to document the incident formally, and that he would be requesting that Ms. Sinclair be moved to a different area of the aircraft for the remainder of the flight. He said it the way a person says something they have already decided, which is to say, he said it once without repetition, and then he was done. Vanessa Sinclair had walked onto this plane 2 hours and 40 minutes ago with the absolute confidence of a woman who had never once been on the wrong side of a room. She sat in row 3B now, with her hands in her lap, her champagne glass empty, and the specific stillness of someone who has just understood with total clarity exactly what they have done. Rachel moved through the process the way she had been trained to, methodically without drama, and without making it a spectacle for the rest of the cabin. She retrieved the incident documentation form from the galley, filled in the required fields in her careful even handwriting, and presented it to Logan for review. He read it once, made one small correction to a timestamp, and handed it back. Then he picked up his laptop bag and his carry-on from the overhead bin, moved to the single open seat in the forward section, and settled back in without another word directed at Vanessa Sinclair. The interaction from his side of it was finished. What came next was procedural, and procedure did not require his ongoing attention. Vanessa was moved to a seat in the rear of the first-class cabin, a row away from where she had been close enough that everyone who had witnessed the incident understood exactly what had happened and why. She sat down without argument, which was itself a kind of statement. The woman who had spent 2.5 hours making her position loudly, deliberately known, had nothing left to say. She kept her eyes on the window and her hands folded in her lap, and the champagne glass in front of her remained untouched for the rest of the flight. She did not call Rachel over again. She did not flag anyone down. Whatever had powered her through the previous 2.5 hours had simply stopped the way an engine stops when the fuel runs out. Not dramatically, not with any particular announcement just gone. The cabin settled back into its ordinary rhythms, the quiet hum of the engines, the soft movement of the crew through the aisle, the low ambient noise of people returning to the private worlds of their headphones and their screens. But the quality of the quiet was different now. The man in the navy blazer had his magazine open but was not reading it. The woman behind Logan's original seat had taken out her phone and was holding it at a specific, deliberate angle. A few rows back, 2 passengers leaned toward each other and spoke in voices too low to carry. Whatever had been held in suspension for the past 2.5 hours had now landed, and everyone in the cabin was quietly deciding where they stood in relation to it. What no one in that cabin knew, yet though several of them would know within hours, was that at least 3 passengers had been recording from the moment Vanessa emptied the champagne glass. The footage was not long. The clearest of the 3 clips ran approximately 45 seconds and captured the moment of impact, Vanessa's exact words, and Logan's response in full. It was shot steadily enough to be unmistakable, and was brief enough to be watched in its entirety without effort. By the time Horizon Air Flight 114 touched down at Los Angeles International at 1:53 in the afternoon Pacific time, the clip had already been shared enough times that it was beginning to surface on the kind of accounts that exist specifically to catch this sort of thing and amplify it before anyone involved has had time to prepare. By midnight, it had a name. People online were calling it the economy incident, and the phrase "buy your own economy" had been quoted. screenshot and reposted enough times that it had achieved the specific grim immortality of a sentence said in public by someone who did not expect to be heard by anyone who mattered. The clip traveled the way clips travel, when they contain something both undeniable and complete, when there is no ambiguity about what happened, no second angle that softens it, nothing to debate except the consequences. Vanessa Sinclair's name was attached to the story before she had landed. By the time she reached baggage claim, her phone had accumulated a volume of notifications that made it functionally unusable. She turned it face down on the carousel and waited for her luggage with the flat, careful stillness of someone who already knows what they are about to walk into and has not yet found a way to face it. The coverage moved fast and in every direction at once. Entertainment and business media ran the story simultaneously, which was unusual enough to signal that what had happened was not being processed as a simple viral moment, but as something with actual consequence. Vanessa's company, a consulting and personal brand firm she had built over the better part of a decade, was named in nearly every piece. Her social media following, which had taken years to assemble, and which she had managed with genuine strategic intelligence, began to move in the wrong direction within the first 24 hours. Not catastrophically at first, just steadily. The way water finds the low point in a floor and keeps moving until it finds somewhere to stop. What accelerated things was not the clip itself, but what came after it. Former employees began to surface not in a coordinated way, but in the organic, independent way that happens when a specific story creates enough public permission for people to say what they had previously kept private. A woman who had worked for Vanessa's firm for nearly 3 years described a management culture built on the same hierarchy of contempt that the cabin footage had made, visible a workplace where value was assigned not by contribution, but by proximity to Vanessa's approval, and where that approval moved unpredictably and without explanation. A former contractor said he had been dismissed from a project after pushing back on a client decision, and that Vanessa had told him his kind of thinking belonged in a different room. He did not specify what he meant by kind. He didn't need to. The context the clip had provided was sufficient, and the people reading it filled in the rest on their own. 2 of Vanessa's corporate partnerships put their contracts into a formal review process within 72 hours of the story breaking. One of them, a hospitality brand that had featured her prominently in its recent marketing, issued a statement that used the phrase "values alignment" twice and said nothing specific about anything which was itself specific enough. The second partnership, a financial wellness platform, sent a private communication before making any public statement. Vanessa's team responded. The conversation did not go well, and within a week the partnership had quietly ended. Vanessa released a public statement 4 days after the flight. It was long. It acknowledged the incident, expressed regret for the impact of her behavior, and used the phrase, "I take full responsibility," in a way that sat uneasily beside 6 paragraphs of contextualizing language about stress, high expectations, and the pressures of maintaining a public profile. The internet read it the way the internet reads public apologies, carefully, in bad faith, and with a fine-toothed comb, and the consensus was not favorable. The statement generated more coverage than the original clip had. By that point, most of it focused on what the apology appeared to be doing, rather than what it said. Logan did not comment publicly. Horizon Air's communications team released a single statement, 2 paragraphs, in which the company confirmed the incident had occurred on one of its flights, confirmed that appropriate documentation and action had been taken per company policy, and stated that Horizon Air was committed to ensuring all passengers and crew were treated with dignity, regardless of fare class or ticket origin. The statement named Rachel Novak by role senior cabin attendant and commended her handling of a difficult situation under sustained pressure. It did not name Vanessa Sinclair. It did not need to. Rachel received the commendation on a Thursday morning via an internal company message, that arrived before the external statement went live. The message was from Logan, directly, not from communications, not from HR, but from him. It was 4 sentences. It told her she had handled the situation with more professionalism than the circumstances required, that her composure had reflected exactly the culture Horizon Air was trying to maintain, and that he had noted her performance formally in her file. The 4th sentence said that if she had any interest in the company's leadership development program, she should let him know, and he would make sure her name was put forward. Rachel read the message twice, set her phone face down on her kitchen table, and sat with it for a long moment before she wrote back. The legal dimension resolved more quietly than the public one. Vanessa's team reached out to Horizon Air's legal department within 2 weeks of the incident. The conversation that followed was brief and concluded without litigation. The terms were not disclosed. What was disclosed through a small item in a trade publication was that Vanessa Sinclair had been formally placed on Horizon Air's restricted passenger list, which meant she could not book a ticket on any Horizon Air flight for a period of 5 years. The item was 3 sentences long and generated more reader engagement than the trade publication's previous 4 issues combined. The 6 months that followed were not quiet ones for Vanessa, though they became progressively quieter. The partnership reviews concluded, and not in her favor. Her social following stabilized. Eventually, it always does, but at a number significantly lower than where it had been, and the engagement rate, which is the metric that actually determines what a public profile is worth to the people paying for access to it, did not recover at the same pace. She restructured her firm. She let 2 full-time staff members go and moved to a smaller office in a less prominent part of the building she had previously occupied an entire floor of. She took on different kinds of clients, less visible ones, companies that needed strategic counsel and were not particularly interested in her personal brand as part of the arrangement. It was not nothing. It was still a career, still an income, still a version of the professional identity she had built. But it was a materially different version of the life she had been living, and the distance between the 2 versions was by any honest measure significant. Logan Carter was back on a Horizon Air flight within 3 weeks of the Los Angeles incident. Different route, a morning departure out of Denver, heading to Miami, a 4-hour crossing with a full first-class cabin, and a crew he had not observed before. He took his seat, opened his laptop, ordered coffee, and began reading through the new policy framework his head of customer experience had drafted in the weeks following the incident. Patricia had done thorough work. The framework expanded protections for both passengers and crew in situations involving harassment or discriminatory treatment, formalized the documentation process that Rachel had executed largely from instinct and training, and created a clear internal escalation path that did not require a crew member to determine on their own and in real time how serious a situation had become before they were permitted to respond to it fully. It also established a dedicated review process for incidents involving premium passengers, a recognition that the power dynamics in a first-class cabin created specific conditions that the existing policy had not adequately addressed. Logan read through the draft for 90 minutes, made notes in the margins, flagged 2 sections for further review, and sent Patricia a message saying it was strong and that he wanted to discuss the implementation timeline before the end of the month. Then he put the document away and looked out the window at the cloud cover below, white and flat, and continuous in every direction. He did not think about Vanessa Sinclair specifically. He thought, as he sometimes did on these flights, about the thing the incident had clarified rather than taught him, because it had not taught him anything he didn't already know. What it had clarified was how quickly a room reveals itself when the people in it believe the consequences are ordinary. How a cabin full of adults can watch something wrong happening in plain sight and collectively decide, for reasons that feel reasonable in the moment, to stay quiet. How the person being targeted will often say nothing too, because they have learned somewhere along the way that saying something costs more than it's worth. He had seen all of this before in different forms and different rooms. What had been clarifying this time was not the behavior, but the response, Rachel's composure, the careful documentation, the way a situation that could have become disorderly had instead been handled with a steadiness that he recognized as something worth protecting and worth building on systematically. He was not interested in what had happened to Vanessa Sinclair. That was not indifference. It was simply an accurate assessment of where his attention was most usefully directed. What had happened to Vanessa Sinclair was the consequence of choices she had made in full view of an aircraft full of witnesses, and those consequences had unfolded the way consequences do when there is no one left to manage the distance between action and outcome. There was nothing in that story that required his ongoing participation. His part of it was done. The flight landed in Miami on schedule. Logan gathered his things, thanked the crew by name at the door, and walked up the jetway into the terminal. He moved through it like a man with somewhere to be, which he was, and like a man who expected nothing particular from the room around him, which he also was. He did not look like the person who owned the plane he had just stepped off of. He never did. That was, as it had always been, entirely the point.